Please join me in welcoming our speakers for the first session of the day, which is Defending Workplace Equality, the Case for DEIB Evolution. Please welcome our speakers, Aisha Hamid, Vice President and DE&I Manager of Alliant Insurance Services, Ashley Brundage, President and CEO of Empowering Differences, Carl Satterwhite, CEO, RCF Group, Elaine Lynn Herring, author, facilitator, and speaker, Mike Hess, founder, executive director, Blind Institute of Technology. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Tammy. And oh my goodness, what a warm welcome for the Mobilize Women's Summit. I know I'm super honored to be here as a white, middle-aged, proud woman with red, flowy hair. I am super excited to be joined by such an amazing panel guest. And I'm thinking that maybe if we could just learn maybe a quick tidbit from every single one of the panelists, I think it would be pretty valuable. I know we're here to talk about DEIB because this is exactly a great place to start for how we can help people mobilize and to be stronger together and be connected. And I know that DEIB, of course, has had lots of names throughout the years and lots of advocacy and lots of efforts to bring people together. And I love the fact that, and actually, it even makes me think of one more really important thing. Yesterday, I literally sat in a room with hundreds of corporate government relation officials of all the top corporations across Florida. And I was literally asked this exact question about why DEI? And I sat in the room yesterday and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to say this when I introduce the panel today, because I sat there and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm being asked this question and they should know the answer to this question. But nonetheless, I think it's really important to say that diversity is the presence of differences that make us each unique. And I turned to the group who were all representing Florida and I said, there are 22 million Floridians. That means there are 22 million different people who live in Florida. And so they all have their own differences. And when we bring our differences together and we get an opportunity to learn about how people are different, we can connect, we can communicate better, we can even sell more things to more people ultimately. And we have to understand the differences so that that way we can then get equity and know that everybody needs different things in this world. My healthcare is different from somebody else's healthcare. My resources as a mom are different because I have two kids I have to think about. And so all of the things that we live and do really impact our journey. And inclusion is what brings us all together. So speaking of inclusion, let's make sure we hear about who we have here. I know we heard a brief introduction, but I would love to start with Aisha and tell us a little bit about who you are.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ashley. Hi, everyone. My name is Aisha Hamid. I go by she, her pronouns. And anyone that has a visual impairment, I am a South Asian woman with light brown skin, wearing glasses, a red scarf, and gray blazer. I have been serving as the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Alliant Insurance Services. We are a national insurance brokerage company based in California. And I've been doing this work for a little over a decade now in a variety of different industries. And the lens that I bring to the table today, I am passionate about systemic shifts that cultivate cultures of belonging, which is why we're all here.
I love it. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. And let's kick it over to Elaine. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. I'm Elaine Lynn Herring. I am an East Asian woman with black hair wearing a white blouse with black splotches on it, and I have freckles. I am a recovering attorney turned leadership development consultant and facilitator, and most recently the author of the book Unlearning Silence: How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully. I am not technically a DEI practitioner, and so I'm particularly honored to bring a different perspective to DEIB on this panel. But as someone who cares about humanity and honoring our common humanity and making workplaces actually work for us, that's the lens that I bring to this conversation. Delighted to be here.
I love it, and thank you for that as well, Carl. Hey, how are you doing?
I am well. Thank you very much. I'm Carl Satterwhite. I am an African American male. I'm wearing a blue and white checkered jacket and a blue mock turtleneck. I come to this conversation with 20 years experience in corporate America, working in workspaces for Procter and Gamble and a Kroger Corporation, and I've been an entrepreneur for 21 years, doing business in all 50 states and 22 countries. This conversation is important, and I am glad and honored to be a part of it. And what I bring from my lens is the ability to talk from supply chain, workforce, corporate, and entrepreneurial perspective. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, and we're honored to have you as well. And last but certainly not least, Mike. Hey, how are you doing? Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Thanks, Ashley, for having me. Excited to be here today. I have been legally blind or blind my entire life, and I'm in my 50s now, so it's been a minute. I grew up in tech for it's been more than 3 decades now, so it's been a minute. I started as a programmer way back when changing 2-digit date fields to 4-digit date fields was cool and trendy due to Y2K or year 2000. So started in tech a long time ago and managed 7 and 8 figure projects over my career. However, I left my 6-figure income about 12 years ago now because I was truly always the token blind person in very large Fortune 5 and Fortune 600 brands. And started Blind Institute of Technology. And what's unique about BIT is we act as a nonprofit staffing agency. So we serve professionals with disabilities and lead the conversation with very large brands across the country, helping them with their inclusion efforts to include professionals with disabilities.
I love it, and thank you so much for bringing your voice to this discussion as well. So obviously our panel is centered around the case, the evolution, and obviously when you're all of you who are attending today, think about how you go and fight for the resources to be a part of Elevate Network in your organization. You have to present a business case typically. So I think that that's the best place for us to start. And I know, Carl, you mentioned business case in your opening remarks. And I know that, Aisha, you also have an expertise in this space. We probably all have opinions in this. But let's talk about how the data speaks volumes and diverse companies reap all the higher profit benefits. And they have the trajectory to be innovative and nimble and outperform their market peers. Let's talk about this business case and let's dive into this. And maybe, Carl, since you mentioned it first, why don't we go to you first and then we'll hear from others.
Yeah, I'd like to start by framing up my position. I believe that we really need to look at DEI as differences elevated intentionally, because that's what this is all about. And it's so that we can belong. It's differences elevated intentionally. And the reality is that those differences have a power. That's where we can bring in innovation, creativity, and invention between bringing all the best together. So diverse populations bring diverse thoughts, diverse ideals, diverse ability to express. And that's really what we need to be doing today. We really need to be doing that across the board. I'm very fortunate to work with some of the largest corporations in the country. And because of that, I'm able to bring my authentic self. People ask me, do you think you're better than your competition? I say, no, I'm uniquely different than my competition. And I bring something that they could never bring. They haven't lived my experiences. They haven't had the things transpire that would build into them that I've had built into me. And once we really get together and we can exploit that, that's where the power happens. And if we really think about all the things that have been created in this world, much of that's happened because of diversity. Some of that good and the bad, but that they've happened because diverse thinking people, The diversity of thought is what brings the impact that may have never been seen before. Corporations are recognizing this and harnessing that power. Those metrics are out there for all to see.
Yeah.
We can look at that diversity and say it was happenstance or it was delivered only because of a corporation's mindset, teaching, and development, or we can realize that it uniquely has its own power. And once we allow that to fully be authentic and fully show up in all spaces of commerce, that's when we'll be the superpower we're supposed to be. That's when we won't have to be fighting about what this really means. We won't have to be defending what this means. We'll just be differences elevated intentionally.
I love that. It's like, and I live in Florida, we have a moniker that's like where DEI goes to die. And I'm like literally trying to like circumvent that moniker. And to your point, I remember when I was literally building the business case for, at the time I was working at PNC Bank as a banker. I was generating $3 million in additional revenue specifically by involving my community and building strategic relationships and bringing banking and business banking and all kinds of client opportunities to the discussion. And I was keeping a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet was what exactly they said, oh, well, why are we going to create this program around the nation? And I said, oh, well, here's why. And I literally handed them the money. And I said, this is exactly why. And then now I can do this for not just Florida, but I can do it for the whole company, for the bank. And so, and that's how I got to yes, was literally by handing them the money and showing them the slips. Aisha, what are you thinking about this topic?
Yeah, I think Cara really nailed it in terms of diversity of thought, but even, going a little bit further, because I think we're in an age right now where we talk a lot about the tech revolution, innovation in organizations, right? You have to be innovative and cutting edge in order to get business and in order to grow as an organization. So something that we don't often talk about is how having diverse perspectives can also increase friction, which oftentimes people are like, friction is a negative word. Friction is what creates different ideas, which lead to innovation. So that's a big piece. But the other piece that I think is really important to address right now, because belonging comes up often, is that we are, as not just in the US, but I know we have a global audience today, we are losing billions of dollars annually on a global scale due to lack of engagement. You all likely have heard of quiet quitting. Those rates are really high. 7 out of 10 people are quiet quitting within their jobs. And what the research shows us is interesting. There is a direct connection between engagement and belonging, right? SHRM shows us that there is a connection between whether or not people belong within the organization and how they rate the employee net promoter score. So clearly the data is showing us that this is important, but more like, when we think about it from the client facing side as well, you need this in order to succeed in contemporary society and the economy that we have right now.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm just thinking also too, as we look to have this be more than just the U.S. and it's a global impact because of course our differences are felt differently as we move about the world. I know I do business in like 7 or 8 countries usually every year and pop in, pop out, and then I realize that DEIB looks a little bit different based on where people live. But I know, Elaine, you specifically mentioned in your opening of doing business in 6 continents across various industries. Can you talk a little bit about the observations that you've seen in relation to the internationality of this work?
Absolutely. I also want to pick up on something that Aisha said, which is you can have diverse perspectives, but those perspectives don't come to the surface, aren't in conversation, aren't at the table if people feel like they have to silence themselves in order to keep their seat at the table, keep their job, keep being invited to the meeting, and also if they feel silenced by the system or by their managers. So I know we'll get further into it, but that there's a leverage point that actually harnesses those diverse perspectives, unleashes talent, gets us to those outcomes, those business outcomes, Aisha, that you were talking about. My observation and experience from working on 6 different continents across industries, all level of seniorities, is that fundamentally, people are people. People are people, and that means we, unsurprisingly, want to be respected, want to be seen, known, heard, appreciated for what we bring, and maintain autonomy as to when we get to choose what we bring, what we say, rather than, Mike, you mentioned being the token blind person, right? Hey, Mike, tell us about this. And in that, we're not recognizing you in your full humanity or whatever level you want to bring to work, because we have reduced you to a specific function. So it's not a novel idea that people are people and want to be treated by people. And it begs the question, how did we get to a place where our workplaces are not focused on us as human beings, but on producing widgets, on playing the role, right? We're not in this production economy in the way that we were in the Industrial Revolution. How are we updating the way that we interact with each other as colleagues, how we view employees? So often we talk about human capital or the human assets. People aren't people to be owned. People are people to try to have an impact, to bring out their perspectives and do good work together, do impactful work together.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And now I'm just literally thinking about Pesh Mode. and and I'm just literally playing that song in my head.
Well, and define the song for people who aren't familiar.
Yes, people are people is literally the song. So if you haven't had a chance, definitely, I think that's a really good conversational thing for maybe your DEI conversations that
now we have a theme song.
Yes, it could be a theme song. And so I know, Mike, you're out there too, and I know we want to get your voice in this conversation as well. Please, I know 80% of the time people with disabilities are excluded from conversations. I personally, I have 3 hidden disabilities, and I don't always talk about them, but I know that they bubble up, and I have to have certain resources at my disposal so they don't affect my lived experiences. But can you talk about the employment positivity that contributes to the economy, society at large, and internally within organizations? And maybe some examples as well might help people realize.
Sure. Yeah. And honestly, it's when you think about the numbers globally for people with disabilities, they say we are 1 billion strong. And not all disabilities are visible like mine. Like I have a service animal and or a white cane. Again, the vast majority of people with disabilities are actually invisible or not apparent. And so, but again, we're all part of this 1 billion strong. And when you look at the unemployment numbers here in the United States, across the globe, for people with disabilities, like it's egregious. For neurodivergent individuals, they say unemployment is as high as 90%. So this is not these aren't small numbers. However, I love the fact that Accenture is a sponsor of the Mobilize Women Conference, because Accenture has a disability equity index report that is out. They've been doing it for multiple years now, and they've been able to prove that organizations who recruit and retain talent from the people with disabilities community have 28% higher revenue than peers, right, who are not recruiting and retaining talent from the people with disabilities. They have 2 times higher net operating income. So when we're talking about the business case, you have to be able to talk about the numbers in totality. One, we are the most excluded demographic from a talent acquisition perspective, and yet it's proven that when we are actually recruited and retained for the unique abilities that we bring to an organization, we literally supercharge an organization's bottom line.
I mean, I can't argue with supercharging. And I know that the numbers really speak volumes, especially when they're communicated to the right people in a corporation. And so, Aisha, why don't you help us a little bit in this space? Because I know you played a pivotal role at Alliant Insurance Services. Can you talk a little bit about how you're designing and executing the 6-pillar DEI strategy, and how you're leveraging some of this information as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I want to preface by saying that it's important that we look at the data and we look at what's happening overall. You know, after the murder of George Floyd, there was a 55% uptake in the number of DE&I roles, departments, and efforts within organizations. And just 2 years after that, in 2022, there was a 33% decline in those same types of DE&I roles and positions. And a lot of times this is because there is reactionary approaches from organizations and the work isn't embedded within the workplace. And so it's very easy to take it out. And so at Alliant Insurance Services, when we built out our DE&I strategy, we were very intentional about making sure that we got top-down support, that we took a change management approach and introduced those concepts, engaged with the organization to figure out the primary issues, engaged the organization to figure out what does our self-ID data look like. We wanted to make sure we were measuring things, because otherwise you're just throwing things and not really understanding where they're landing. So we were very intentional about creating a data-driven, people-centric strategy. And when you embed DE&I within every part of the organization and take a systems approach, so we work with HR, learning and development, all the different people functions and business groups across our organization. And because they're also taking the charge on it, and it's not just a silo of us as DE&I professionals having to handle the entire organization's work, because this is something that takes a collective, because it's embedded in the key functions within the organization over a period of time, it's very difficult to uproot. And I'm really proud to say that in our organization, we have not seen any budgetary significant cuts for our DE&I efforts. If anything, we're one of the largest DE&I departments in our industry. We have 6 different professionals full-time working on DE&I, and there is a clear need for it just based on the increase in the interest based on that. But to answer again to Ashley, to your question, at the crux of this, it's about making sure that your strategy is data-driven, people-centric, that you have top-down support for it, and that you're embedding it from a systems and structures perspective.
I love it. And so much of the corporate DEI work is all about connecting the people to resources, to connect them to other people in the community as well. I know that one of the things that I did when I was the DEI person at PNC Bank in my prior career was manage relationships with organizations in the community. And I know, Carl, this is something that's very important to you, because your organization, RFC Group, is a NMSDC. And for those that don't know, NMSDC is the National Minority Supplier Development Council, which does supplier diversity advocacy work for diverse suppliers. I think that this is a great partnership that you have. Can you talk about how your company gets actively involved in supporting minority-owned businesses as well?
Absolutely. And I'll use that in a kind of 2 different examples to share. So one, the corporations who are part of the National Minority Supplier Development Councils are very committed. I work with one of the largest banks in the world. As a part of that commitment, I and other key suppliers in their supply chains are asked to deliver and advocate for other diverse companies across the country, because what they've identified is their internal systems may not be able to identify the best diverse supplier who can compete and do work at their scale, but they've been working and asking their incumbents. More specifically, they've asked us to help them in the 14 cities today, which are majority minority, to identify those diverse companies across the board. I believe that kind of partnership is the kind of innovation that's going to be needed to make things happen. Additionally, as a Corporate Plus member of the National Minority Supplier Development Council, we are also gauged by the amount of diverse suppliers we have in our supply chain. So oftentimes what we'll do is either create new businesses to be a part of our supply chain or enable new businesses to be a part of our supply chain. So the example I would give is that we were doing business with Duke Energy across the country, and there was a need to identify diverse suppliers in our supply chain to deliver ultimately to Duke. We were able to create and help develop an installation company to support our furniture division, but not only do that, but also show and teach them how to do business with corporate America and other corporations across the country so they could be sustainable. Also work with them to get certified, became their counselor and advocate, and continue to be on their virtual board of advisors today. I believe that that's what diversity is all about. How do we help each other, be supportive of one another, and continue to grow together so that we can be the solution that's coming against the challenges of just these alphas? It's only the alphas that are being fought. We happen to be diverse leaders, practitioners, owners, customers that are good. There's really, in my opinion, no such thing as kind of that diverse supply chain. There's good supply chains that are either with diverse individuals or not, and we are really working to prove that it's better together.
Yeah, yeah, and my business that I own, Empowering Differences, is a triple certified minority-owned business. I have women's certification, LGBT certification, and disability certification, and I leverage all three differently in different spaces. But it opens up the dialogue with major corporations ultimately, and leads to hopefully more business down the line. Those kinds of conversations don't happen instantly, but I think it's important to be a part of the conversation. One of the things that I also do is really look at the politics of our DEI world, and it's not lost on me. And I don't know if anyone saw, but I am running for the Florida State House of Representatives. And I did mention earlier that Florida is the place, where it's known as DEI goes to die. And I actually literally have friends that work in universities in Florida who have lost their jobs, specifically the University of Florida. And then I have other universities that have just rebranded. and I'm seeing some of them. It's the Center for Inclusive Excellence. and so I'm seeing this happen, and I'm literally watching it live, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, like I can't wait to literally be in Tallahassee and actually maybe change the actual conversation. And Elaine, I know that this is something that you're passionate too. And also, if you're watching right now and you're thinking, oh my God, I really want my question answered, this is probably also be a good time for you to submit your question in the chat, and send it on through to the organizers. They're monitoring it, so we're going to be able to get to the questions. So make sure that you do that, so that way we can get to that question next. And I hope it's pressing. But Elaine, tell us what you're thinking in regards to these bills that exist, and how we can move past that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to your conversation of rebranding D&I, DIB, DIBJ, JEDI, whichever acronym you want to use. I disclosed my bias that fundamentally this is about treating people with dignity and respect. Whatever identities you hold that are apparent, non-apparent. And Aisha, it really goes back to what you were talking about of DEI strategy. Yes, it is people-centric. Yes, you need the buy-in of top leadership, ideally. And it's not just a DEI team that owns DEI. Every single one of us is responsible for treating each other with dignity and respect. And the anti-DEI bills, those are part of the fabric of the conversation that to me are distractions and trying to take energy and resources away from the actual work of implementing strategies where, Carl, what you're saying, it's not a diverse supplier, you're just an effective supplier, you're a good supplier, you're a reliable supplier, you're a supplier that brings perspectives that are necessary for doing work that serves more than just a dominant group of people based on one identity. Now, that also represents a social threat, a change to the status quo, which people who are in positions of power and benefit from the systems as they are right now understandably would feel challenged by, and in a reactionary way try to do things like pass anti-DI bills, and there's a lot of transaction costs there. If we zoom out, a bill is part of what shapes a system, right? Systems can feel really overwhelming, but fundamentally they are the collection of policies and practices that we all operate against. And so keeping that perspective in mind, there is that fight and the question of whether you want to be fighting at the political level. And there's the question, are you well situated? Is that where you put your energy? What battlegrounds are we in? So grateful for the people at the front lines and behind the scenes of those conversations. And to really ask each of us, if it's going to take all of us, and as Carl says, we're better together, what role do I play in creating a team, an organization, a community, and therefore a world that honors the dignity and respect of each and every human being?
Mm, that's powerful. Anyone else had any other thoughts about this?
One only thing that I'll add to this, and Elaine, I mean, you just captured all of this beautifully. I'm seeing a change already in just language. And so I have done workshops, and I think this is powerful to bring up, is I was at a conference, I did the same workshop, 2 different titles. One had DE&I in it, the other was engagement and belonging. Guess which one had a lot of people show up and which one barely had an attendance, right? It's the fact that they're at the crux of this is a level of fear and a fight or flight response. And the fight has so much magnitude because there is a lot happening, right? Whether we want to, whether we notice it or not, there has been steady, consistent increase in representation over time. So to Elaine's point, the groups that are going to have the most to lose are going to be the ones that are going to fight the hardest for this piece of things. So I think as we continue to move forward, also be thinking about how do we speak to people's listening? How do we really engage people? What is the value proposition? And unfortunately, we have to start thinking about those frameworks in order to engage more people and build those allies that are needed to continue this change.
And I would add to that, how do we show up as allies for each other? Because so often, if we're not challenging the models that we've seen of behavior and policy, it's just how things have been done. Or frankly, sometimes it's best practice, but best practice from whose point of view, based on what criteria. So really interrogating what are the norms that have existed and who do they serve? My language would be who do the policy support and who do they silence, and being really intellectually honest about that. And also, though, instead of waiting for a DI person like Aisha to own it and change it, how are we showing up for each other in day-to-day conversation? When someone else cuts your colleague off in conversation, are you a passive bystander, or do you say, hey, I'd really like to hear what Mike has to say, let's let him finish? Right? Those are the moments that change culture as a collection of behaviors over time, that change what becomes normal, that changes frankly, our employee engagement and experience, which is really our day-to-day life.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I know that we've been hearing amazing perspectives. I do want to know a little bit more. Mike, can you tell us a little bit more about the Blind Institute of Technology and kind of what you all are doing? Because I feel like that is a good opportunity to amplify your work as well.
I appreciate it, but I love the conversation. This is my space. You are all my people. What's unique about the disability community as a whole, especially in private industry, it's not even private industry, it's an employment period here in the United States. We're the only protected class that has to ring a very legal, nebulous bell called reasonable accommodation. And so much of what, so me as a blind person, right? Like even though I built a multiple 7-figure business, and we're got partnerships with amazing organizations like Salesforce and ServiceNow and Comcast. Organizations, if I apply for a job, their immediate question is, well, how does a blind person do X, Y, or Z? right? And it always comes down. So to me, what's unique about this population is ringing that legal bell of reasonable accommodation. So much of what we have to do. So when we go out there and we do presentations, marketing, what we're doing, our presentations have the title of technology is the great equalizer. So we have to showcase. We literally have this like triple sell that we always have to do. And first and foremost, we have to be able to let people know, decision makers know, like, okay, here's like if you're a Salesforce shop, and good news is they're a global leader, right? Like, so if you're a Salesforce shop, Salesforce is the reasonable accommodation for somebody like me. ServiceNow is the reasonable accommodation for somebody like me. So it's explaining that, it's helping people realize that assistive technologies are there. And it's not just people who are blind, people who are deaf, motor skills impaired. And guess what? Disability is actually just part of the human condition. If we're lucky enough to live to our 90s or into our centenarian ages, Father Time is undefeated. We will all be part of the disability community, whether we want to or not, right? Because our cognitive diminishes, our motor skills diminishes, our hearing diminishes, our eyesight diminishes. And so this is just a topic that is really uncomfortable for people to talk about. And we always lead with technology as the great equalizer.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And thank you for going a little deeper on the reasonable accommodation piece. I think that's incredibly important. I know we got a question.
Ashley, can I double click on the reasonable accommodation, because it actually raises a thread of whether we are creating belonging at work, whether it is disability, whether it is religious bias, sort of fill in the blank issue, whether it is getting a standing desk versus a sitting desk. How many times do employees have to raise it, have to speak up, have to prove it, get shot down, the amount of paperwork and transaction costs, both for employer and employee, to get to a place where you can you have a baseline to do work, versus what if we created equitable spaces? What if a standing desk or assistive technology was available as a suite of offerings? I haven't crunched the numbers, but I'm sure someone has, of how much energy we save by offering a prayer room, by offering the standing desk as a baseline, rather than an employee having to do the speak up negotiation, cost, risk, benefit analysis, and employers not necessarily knowing how to respond, or making it really onerous for someone to get what they need. And that is the basis of equity, but there's so much more that an employer can do, particularly from a people ops perspective, to change the calculus.
Yeah. And one way you can measure and take a look at this is through your self-ID data, because based on what Mike's saying and how so many of us have some form of disability and are going to at some point get it, versus how many people actually identify in the system as having a disability or being neurodiverse, there's a staggering difference. So to Elaine's point, we have to do, the more we're being proactive as a workplace, the more people are going to feel comfortable, even at the very baseline, just to identify.
Yeah, why do you have to disclose in order to get what you need?
Because, right, and it all comes back to counting the numbers, right? People have to count the numbers to be able to say, oh, this is exactly how many people, and this is how we can create a budget for this. And then obviously a lot of this work is budget driven. So we have to be very purposeful in this request. But also, I think it's incredibly important as a call out that the ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act is a piece of legislation. It's enshrined in the United States specifically, but it's different as you move around the world. Many other countries around the world do not have access at the same level for people who have differing abilities. So I think that's also another important call out in this space. So I know we got some questions, and I want to make sure we get to a few of them. Our first question kind of stemmed around next gen or potentially Gen Z. I know I work with other organizations that partner in that space for our client mix to make sure that we're helping them understand the different way that you have to communicate, the different way you have to build relationships. Is there someone that is doing specific work in this space around recruiting or building relationships for next gen?
Yeah, so we are through our Alliant Insurance Foundation, which is our external arm. Our DE&I efforts tend to focus more so on internal efforts and retention and advancement for underrepresented professionals. Our foundation focuses on the community. So one of the efforts that we are doing is focused on Gen Z and bringing more students, underrepresented students, into the insurance industry, which as a whole tends to be primarily homogenous, especially at the leadership levels. And so we have been very intentional about really centering the experiences and the needs of that particular group, and reaching out and figuring out how do we design a program that's going to really get at the heart of what they are looking for. And they're looking for representation. They are looking at culture. They are paying attention to these different pieces. So the fellowship program that we built for students, the Alliant Insurance Foundation Fellows Program, makes sure that we have mentorship involved. It makes sure that they're getting an introduction to the different culture, that they're getting rotations across the organization, and that we're really building up on our DE&I efforts to really speak to the culture as a whole when we're talking about attracting that group into the organization and being more intentional about outreach efforts.
I love it.
And
Thank you.
after you attract that group or any group into an organization, how do you make the organization a place where they can thrive? And one of the key skills, in my book, Unlearning Silence, I parse out ways that we silence people and silence groups. And one particular skill set for leaders is, can you listen across difference? And that is difference of perspective. That is difference across style of communication. We can look at the statistics of Gen Z of whether, talking real time versus texting versus typing. Are we able to flex and hear people through different styles and modes of communication and different values to co-create an environment where their perspectives are heard? We figure out a way to work together rather than expecting Gen Z or millennials or whichever group to assimilate into one dominant culture.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm just thinking to, we've gone over so many different things from high levels. One of the questions that we got was, what does the everyday average person do in an organization to improve equity or belonging at work? What do you all think about that?
Pay attention. I think that's really what it comes down to, is paying attention. Like, who is getting the important work, the glamour work, the work that's actually going to build your career versus the housekeeping, the administrative work, which always tends to be primarily underrepresented women who end up taking on that work, who is being excluded from different types of events, who is being talked over during meetings and events. So really just paying attention, and who's in your group, who's on your team, who's in your department. What can you do to bring in those outreach efforts? It really comes down to not taking a silo approach and seeing it as a living community. And to some degree, even though in the US we do tend to take a more individualistic approach compared to globally, in certain parts there is that collectivist mentality, being intentional about looking beyond yourself.
Yeah, what I'll add to that is that we really have to get in a posture of sharing success stories, because I think what's the problem is that when someone of any diverse background has a failure, that is screamed across any organization. But when someone from a diverse background has a success, no one says anything. It's just quieted. So we must do a better job. And we got to share our own stories. I've been on a personal mission to do this. As I shared in the beginning, I've been in corporate America for 20 years prior to my entrepreneurial pursuits. And I'm literally having to go back to corporations, to their HR departments, and share with them what their diverse employee of the past and sometimes the present is doing, that's changing the world in their community, that's changing the world in their religious house, that's changing the world in the educational system. And I think when we catch a hold of that kind of wave and we start sharing those, like, you know, hearing your stories from PNC, PNC happens to be a customer, and I know that they haven't grown much further than since you've left. But maybe we need to collectively go back and tell them the stories of how you continue to impact this country based on who you are as an individual. Possibly they could have done more with you to promote you and advance you there. But the reality is that we all have something to give, and we're giving those things in a way that I think we need to magnify so that we can uplift each other and bring more attention to the successes of our diversity.
I love it, and maybe Mike, maybe you can give us a little bit of your kind of. I know we're getting near the end. Give us your takeaways from today.
Well, it's always, to me, I'm very action oriented. The question was, what can I do as an everyday individual? And it's always do something. Like I stopped asking the question, working with the C-suite across organizations. So how many blind people do you have that work for you? How many people who are deaf that work for you? It's an uncomfortable silence. Or I get oh, we have this one. Like that's actually worse than saying we have none. Because tokenism creates trauma. Like it's just not okay. So if you're in a decision-making seat, are you really, are you really attempting to source talent from all communities? Right? Have you, and I've had the same question from executives like, well, I've never interviewed somebody who's blind. Have you, has your talent team actually attempted to source people who are from the disability, that actively disclose that they're from the disability community? Does your communications, does your website actually even have any representation of people with disabilities? We're 25% of the US population alone, right?
At a minimum.
So from a comms perspective, like it just makes sense. But so to me, it's take action. These conversations are great. I call it I'm a GSD kind of dude and get stuff done. And so anybody, I promise you, if I can do it from a small town in Northeast Ohio with no college degree and creating relationships with some of the biggest companies in the world, you can do it as well.
Yeah. And thank you. And Aisha and Elaine, one word each, because I know we're on a tight timeline here. What's your takeaway?
I'm hesitating if I have one word, so I'll talk quickly because Mike's point, actually, the word that stuck out from what Mike said was comfort and discomfort. Whose comfort is your silence prioritizing?
Thanks.
For me, it would be how do we take this momentum and turn it into a sustainable movement? How do we go beyond just reacting and then pulling back? And it comes back to applying what you're learning, having these conversations, paying attention, sharing success stories. So taking away from these conversations and actually implementing them.
I love it. Oh my gosh. Well, you all were absolutely amazing. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be here and help us together to mobilize women. And thank you to all the active participation in the comments and the chats. We're so honored to have you all. And please connect with all of these amazing panelists and get to know more. Just type their names in on Google and you'll find them really easily. Tammy, I think you're out there. I want to throw it to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Ashley, Aisha, Carl, Elaine, and Mike. This has been a great way to start the Mobilize Women's Summit 2024. Your perspectives and your experiences have certainly resonated with our audience, and I encourage those that are listening to talk about this. Post, share, talk about how it made you feel and some of those nuggets, the wisdom that you got out of this. As was stated earlier, better, stronger, faster together. That was what this was all about. And thank you again. At Elevate, we understand the importance of building cultures that engage employees, give them purpose, build trust, and encourage them to stay and grow with the company. That's why we work with our partners to be there as a unique space for their employees to meet others, get diverse perspectives, and continue to grow in their careers. Now, before we open our dynamic speed connecting session, I'm proud to introduce one of our affiliate partners, She Should Run, with an important word from Programs Associate Sophia O'Neill.
Hello, all. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I'm Sophia O'Neill with She Should Run. We are a national, nonpartisan nonprofit working to dramatically increase the number of women who are considering a run for public office. We're really dedicated to helping women realize that their leadership potential is needed and valuable, and help them bring their talents to public service. We have a wide range of programs that help women hone these skills and also connect with the right people to take action in their communities. I'm so grateful that Elevate has brought us all together today during this incredibly crucial time for women and our democracy. It's painfully clear just how challenging things are for women right now, from jobs to wage discrimination, violence to childcare costs. Everyone suffers under bad policy, but women always experience the most severe consequences. And isn't that exhausting? If you're nodding your head right now, you are certainly not alone, because a 2023 Pew Research Center survey found that 65% of Americans reported feeling frequently exhausted when contemplating politics. And you couple that exhaustion with polarization, misinformation, and fatigue. Where does that leave us? In a bad spot with our democracy. Does that just hurt your heart? Doesn't that just make you so mad? And hopefully with this third one, you'll say yes. Doesn't that make you just want to fix it? Once again, you're not alone in feeling all three of those. Generation after generation of women haven't backed down from this challenge. In every presidential election since 1980, women have been the majority of voters. And I know we will be again this year. Women know that inaction is not an option. And She Should Run is here to be that pivotal starting point for women to delve into leadership within their communities, encouraging engagement beyond the confines of a ballot every 4 years. Recognizing the leadership already present in various communities, we are making the case for the transformative power of civic engagement. And that's exactly what She Should Run is doing, working through this election. We are ushering women to take the immediate and simple actions that will yield positive outcomes for our communities today and in the future. Our research shows that there are 24.4 million American women who should be asked to run for office, but aren't. We meet them every single day, especially from underrepresented communities who are brilliant, qualified, and involved women who aren't running. Maybe you know her. Maybe you are her. 24.4 million women. Political science research shows again and again and again that when women engage, our impact is profound. Women legislators sponsor more bills, pass more laws, and send their districts more money. 24.4 million women. When women lead, our impact is immense and immediate. Now, doesn't that sound like just the thing our democracy needs? Despair only begets despairing results. Hope and action bring us solutions and a future we can actually look forward to. In the spirit of this conference, She Should Run is here to mobilize women to take immediate actions in their communities today. My colleague Amanda and I will be available during the Meet the Recruiter hour and would love to get to talk more with each of you about how to get involved in your community and make your difference today. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Sophia. Throughout history, there have been a lot of pivotal moments where full civic engagement in elections and, in getting involved in the political structure is crucial. And we know that 2024 is definitely one of them. It rises to the top. Please get engaged and please vote. You can visit vote.org or usa.gov to check your registration status. It takes less than 30 seconds to be sure that your information is correct, and we will add those links in the chat. And for all of our listeners outside of the US, our message is one and the same. Get engaged, run for office, be active, and lead or support those leaders that you believe in. Now, we invite you to use the next 20 minutes for some one on one connecting. It's what we do best at Elevate, and it wouldn't be Mobilize Women without it. Get in there and have fun, and we'll see you back here on the main stage for a conversation on the rise of AI, evolution at work at 11:30.